Deep in the shadows, beneath the earth, something stirs. Something that shouldn't exist. Something that no one should ever encounter. A place where light never reaches. Where reality bends and shifts. It begins with a noise. A noise so unsettling, so unnatural, that it reverberates through the very fabric of the world. A noise that makes the air feel heavy, thick with something unexplainable. This was no ordinary sound, no simple disturbance. It was the beginning of something far worse. In the quiet night, a small village stood in the darkness. A village no one would notice, far removed from the hustle of the world. And yet, this was the very place where everything changed. The disappearances began slowly at first. One person vanished, then another. The few who noticed couldn't explain it. The authorities were called, but they had no answers. The village, isolated as it was, had been left to fend for itself. And then, it began. Strange, horrifying reports came from those who dared to venture too close. Something was in the air, something unspeakable, but it wasn't just the vanishings. It was worse than that. People spoke of a presence, a sense of something crawling just beneath the surface. There were stories, tales of worms or creatures that resemble worms, but were far more sinister. They came from beneath the earth, crawling their way through the soil, thick and writhing. These weren't mere animals. These were things that shouldn't exist. They moved like shadows, faster than the eye could follow, and they consumed anything in their path. When they struck, it was not just flesh they devoured. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. Souls, perhaps, or maybe the essence of life itself. No one knew. They were just gone, absorbed into the darkness. At first, the people didn't understand. They thought it was an infestation, a freak of nature. But soon, the truth became undeniable. The creatures were too coordinated, too intelligent to be merely animals. And they weren't just interested in food. No, they had a purpose. They were feeding on something far more sinister than the bodies of the villagers. They were feeding on something ancient, something evil. The whispers began, but they didn't help. No one could explain what was really happening. The authorities, too scared to approach, left the village to rot. And in the dark of night, those who remained began to realize the horrifying truth. The creatures were only the beginning. Those who were lost, those who vanished into the darkness, weren't really gone. They returned, but they didn't return as they had been. They were changed. Something twisted and wrong inside of them. Their bodies still walked, but their eyes were empty, hollow. There was no sign of the person they once were, and they hungered. They hungered for more than just food. They hungered for others, for the living, the vermin. These things that once slithered beneath the earth had brought back the dead, only to twist them into something far more horrifying. Those who had survived the initial outbreak knew the truth. The worms weren't merely creatures of the soil. They were servants of something much worse. Something ancient locked away beneath the earth. And now that it had been freed, it was growing stronger by the day. With every life it took, with every person it consumed, it gained power. And it wasn't just the villagers that were being affected. The infection spread. It spread beyond the village, beyond anything anyone could comprehend. The night sky became darker. The air felt colder. The forest was no longer a peaceful place. It had become a hunting ground, a place where the creatures roamed freely. Those who ventured out were never seen again. The vermin and the twisted souls now walked freely in the night, searching for new victims. And it wasn't just the people who were affected. The very land itself seemed to change. The earth trembled. The ground cracked open, and from it, more and more these vile creatures emerged. But there was more. Something worse than the vermin. Something older, more dangerous, was waiting beneath the surface. The worms were merely the messengers, the forerunners of a greater evil. The true horror was still underground, a presence that had been buried for centuries, perhaps millennia. It had been waiting for the right moment to break free. And now that moment had arrived. As the worms continued to feed, the town grew more desolate. There were no longer any living left to speak of. Only the dead remained, their hollow eyes staring at the stars, empty but for the hunger within them. The buildings stood, abandoned. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of the undead. But something was wrong. There was no peace in death, no calm. No, the town had become something else entirely. It was a breeding ground for terror, a place where no light could ever shine again. In the depths of this nightmare, there was no escape. Those who had tried to fight the creatures, tried to burn them away with fire, had failed. Each attempt only made things worse. The vermin grew in number, more powerful with every strike. It seemed there was no way to stop them. No one could fight back the darkness that had taken over. And soon, it wasn't just a village that was threatened. The rest of the world was beginning to feel the tremors of this ancient evil. The creatures were spreading, creeping ever closer to civilization. The question now was whether anyone could stop it. The question was how far would it spread before it consumed everything? Could anyone survive? Could anyone live through this nightmare? Would there be anyone left to fight? And then came the truth, revealed in the most horrifying way possible. The worms weren't just feeding on flesh. No, they were feeding on the very essence of life itself. They weren't merely animals. They were parasites, symbiotes, servants of an ancient demon, a creature so old it was beyond understanding. It had been trapped beneath the earth for centuries. But with the awakening of these creatures, it had begun to rise again. The true horror wasn't in the vermin themselves, but in what they were carrying. They were the bearers of a curse that could not be undone. And with each person they consumed, the curse grew stronger, spreading further, consuming more and more of the world. The survivors, those few who were left, began to realize something even worse. They were already too late. The evil had already spread too far. The demons had already crossed the line between the underground and the world above. The worms were only the start. There was something much worse waiting for them. And then, the skies darkened, the winds picked up, and the earth began to shake. Something massive, something ancient, began to rise from the depths. It wasn't just a creature. It was a force, a living darkness, the kind of terror that cannot be fought, that cannot be reasoned with. It was the end, and it was only just beginning. The worms weren't just animals. They were the heralds of the true apocalypse. And with every passing moment as they consumed more lives, the world was drawn closer to its end. It wasn't just a village that was dying. It was the entire world, slipping slowly into the abyss. And so, the nightmare continues. It spreads. It infects. It consumes. And no one knows if there will ever be a way to stop it. All anyone knows is that the worms are coming, and with them, a darkness that will consume everything in its path. It will never end. It will never stop. The question is simple. Will you survive the coming nightmare, or will you become one more victim of the ancient evil that is now awake and walking among us? There is no escape. There is no safety. There is only the horror of what lies beneath. The end has come, and it is hungry. The horror didn't stop. It only grew, consuming everything in its wake. The darkness, now fully awakened, spread faster than anyone could comprehend. Cities once bustling with life, now stood still, abandoned by the living and overtaken by the dead. The worms, those twisted creatures that once seemed like the origin of all this, were now seen for what they truly were, harbingers of a far greater force. As the world around them collapsed, Survivors were few. Most had either been consumed, twisted, or had fled to the farthest corners of the earth, hoping to escape the endless wave of terror. But the evil was everywhere. It had no boundaries, no borders. It wasn't bound by geography or distance. It was a presence that suffocated everything. No place was safe. The world had become a breeding ground for creatures. Every day, new vermin emerged from the earth, bringing with them a fresh wave of death. The few survivors who managed to remain hidden found themselves hunted, not only by the creatures but by the twisted souls of those they once knew. These reanimated bodies, no longer human but controlled by the ancient evil, sought only one thing: more victims. They were as much a part of the nightmare as the vermin themselves, driven by a hunger that was insatiable, a need that could never be satisfied. Some survivors tried to fight back. They formed small groups, banding together in the ruins of their cities, fortify what was left, try to reclaim their humanity. But it was clear that the odds were stacked against them. Each attempt to strike back only seemed to fuel the evil further. The more they fought, the more the worms multiplied, the more the dead returned. They were trapped in a cycle of despair, unable to break free from the terror that was consuming their world. And then, on one dark and stormy night, the ground shook again. It wasn't a simple tremor this time. It was a roar from the earth itself, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the planet. The survivors, hiding in their makeshift shelters, felt it in their bones. They knew it wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. From the deepest depths of the earth, a massive form began to rise. It was not a worm. It was not human. It was something beyond comprehension, an ancient being, pure darkness and malice given shape. Its form was ever-changing, shifting between dimensions as if it didn't belong in the world at all. It towered over everything. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly fire, its presence suffocating the very air around it. The nightmare had only just begun, and the world had no hope of surviving.